Welcome back. Well, confirmation this week that one of the experts on crime you hear from on a regular basis has now been appointed to what's called the Future Council of the International Policing Organisation, Interpol. Dr. Guy Lamb is a criminologist in the Department of Political Science at the University of Stellenbosch. He's played an important role in developing policies to fight crime. Dr. Lamb, good afternoon to you and congratulations to you. What kind of role does this committee play?
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. It's kind of evolving as we kind of speak. That's just something new that Interpol's done. I mean, typically Interpol's been kind of quite a conservative type of policing organization. Its role has really been to facilitate communication between policing agencies across the globe, to share information, to share intelligence, to sort of try and find commonality, to generate standards around policing and to kind of deal with international criminality. We know about Interpol when, kind of they're fugitives from justice, encounter this with the Guptas, for example, red notices get issued, from one country and it requests, other members within the Interpol structures to certainly apprehend and arrest those fugitives that certain countries are looking for. So that's typically how Interpol works. It's also, it encourages cooperation between states on cross-border issues. So within the Southern African context, Interpol has been very active through the Southern African Regional Police Chiefs Cooperation Organization. They have their headquarters based in Harare, but they've been doing a lot of work in the past around, tracking down and seizing and destroying illegal weapons, looking at, the theft of motor vehicles and those vehicles crossing borders, looking at wildlife-related crimes such as the smuggling of rhino horn and ivory and those kind of issues. So they played quite a prominent role. But I think what's this process that's unfolding for them is a sort of realization that policing might be left behind, the sense of around there's this future challenges or existing challenges that face policing and law enforcement, namely such as political conflicts and geopolitical shifts, like what we're seeing, different roles that are adopted by different states, crisis in the Middle East, which is having implications for policing and, law enforcement at the sort of national level, but also cyber criminality. And it's the sense of, well, the police need to be trying to keep abreast of this. And so what is normally policing discussions amongst police, they sort of, I think, reached out to, observers, to analysts, to researchers, to specialists, to bring their advice and insights to help them kind of stay abreast of the quite rapidly expanding kind of new terrain of criminality.
When you look at the future of crime, I mean, what kind of issues are going to come up? I suppose, let me put this another way. What kind of criminal enterprises do you think we're going to see over the next few years?
Well, I mean, the same types of crime I don't think is going to change, but certainly what we're seeing is an escalation within certainly cyber criminality, or you're seeing organized criminal groups making use of cyber, type of cryptocurrencies, and, police not being really equipped for that. The types of hacking attacks that many countries have experienced and companies are experiencing, and a sort of a sense of, some police and law enforcement agencies in more developed countries are quite well prepared and resourced in dealing with this, but other countries are not. So, for example, South Africa has experienced, types of cyber groups operating here. Black Axe is one of them, for example, targeting citizens with sort of scams and kind of criminal type arrangements. And the idea is really to try and help out, law enforcement agencies to deal with this type of criminality. So we're seeing it in the sense of within the cyberspace, but also in which sort of cryptocurrency is being used as a way to launder money, as a way to encourage and support illegal activities. I mean, that's certainly one issue. But I think it's about trying to understand how climate change is affecting kind of criminal organizations. We're certainly starting to see, kind of linkages between criminal organizations in certain states. And it's sort of makes it difficult for, for governments to respond in this kind of complex environment.
I mean, you talk about cryptocurrencies from, I suppose, probably the 9/11 attacks on the United States in 2001. There's been a huge move to really monitor money flows. And we see those culminating in the fact that we now know that money went from South Africa through, I think, HSBC, I think it was, to the Guptas. We can see what role banks played during that time. But cryptocurrency completely upsets that whole effort, and the nature of cryptocurrency probably makes it impossible to kind of, continue that progress. No one will be able to track money flows anymore. That must be a huge blow to the fight against crime.
It makes it very difficult, but I suppose the important thing around it, the Interpol arrangement, is you can share information, you can share best practice, you can bring lessons from what has worked in some context, you can share intelligence, you can identify who potential players and groups are, and that way you can try and counteract it. But also through the Future Council, I'm no crypto expert, but I assume that they will have crypto experts on it, is to look at what is the best way of trying to deal with this, particularly for a country like South Africa, but for other developing countries. What can we learn from what other states have been doing?
The whole point of Interpol is that countries need to work together, and we talk about cross-border crime. There are some times when we see certain governments being involved in helping criminality or empowering, or maybe enabling is a better word. There was a very famous documentary on a international television network about the smuggling of gold, which really implicated people in Zimbabwe. I mean, when you have actors like that, it must be very difficult. Are we seeing an increase in that? If we look at some of the conflicts we see around the world, political actors or other actors have a very real interest in that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's important. I think it's around where Interpol can play a role is through national intelligence agencies gathering the relevant information about these particular entities, sharing that information with others through Interpol. Depending on the type of crime involved, for example, on sort of weapons smuggling, which is a key issue, as you've seen kind of states develop quite effective responses to it, but, the sharing of information hasn't been as effective as it could have been. But, absolutely the environment and the ecosphere in which you see these criminal organizations operating has become a lot more sophisticated, a lot more difficult to certainly combat from a traditional policing point of view. So I think it is quite important that police start to look at around what skills they need in the future, what techniques, what sort of platforms. And I think the discussion I've been seeing, certainly the documents shared by Interpol, is looking at their internal platforms of information sharing and intelligence gathering and seeing are they fit for purpose with the sort of new policing environment that they're confronted with.
And Dr. Lam, I mean, we've seen, as you know, you've been looking at it very closely, a big increase in crime and violent crime here since the end of the pandemic. It looks like the rate of increase is slowing. But for the moment, and we're in the middle of a session where we don't yet know who the new police minister will be. We understand the current police minister, Bekele, may not return to Parliament, is my understanding. Obviously, there's a need for leadership within the police, and technically the minister is not responsible for the day-to-day management of the police. The National Police Commissioner is. But is the role of police minister at this time significant, important?
I think absolutely, because it's around, we're sitting with a fairly conservative police organization. It's fairly large, but also it's quite bulky. It's kind of not necessarily geared towards innovation. I mean, it's trying. It certainly has been trying with new kind of evidence-led type of interventions. But, what I think what the Interpol document is trying to speak to, and also what we're encountering within South Africa, is the limits of the sort of militarized policing approach, hierarchical policing approach that we've had, the sort of saturation policing, high density policing. And I think there's been an acknowledgement, certainly by the minister shortly before the elections, was that, we need to start bringing into play this integrated crime and violence prevention strategy, which is an official, strategy of government approved in 2022 by cabinet, which speaks to addressing the societal drivers, the economic drivers of crime and violence in South Africa. And that's certainly been noticed by Interpol because, much of the kind of conflict and instability and unrest that's happening in many countries, related to misinformation spreading, intentional undermining of democratic processes, the rise of the far right, for example, the sort of protest violence around climate action. These kind of issues are quite key and need to be taken into account. And it's the same within South Africa. If we don't get a handle on, trying to address the kind of socioeconomic drivers of crime within South Africa, it's not going to get better.